welcome back. As you can see, Shay and Wilfred still here with us. And now joining us is Clare Farrell, one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. As we are going to ask now, is it ever okay to break the law to save the planet? 0207 862 2222 is the number for your views. Please ring, we want to hear from you. It's a question being asked by celebrity conservationist Chris Packham in the latest TV programme. Let's take a look.
Two young, terrified and angry protesters. And when I look at them, I can't help but have enormous empathy for them. And yet they've just committed an act of some sort of childish vandalism. I'm carrying the guilt of generations who didn't act.
If they're prepared to make sacrifices to get their fear across, part of me is asking myself, should I be joining them?
Now, Clare, you're joining us now for this debate. Thank you very much. You have done just this. You've been arrested several times. What did the police say? What laws did the police say that you had broken?
Well, there's a variety of things people do in order to protest. You know, one of the cases was called willful obstruction of the highway. That basically means sitting in the road and not moving. I had that charge, as an example, overturned on appeal because you have to consider the proportionality of what is the point that somebody is trying to get across in the process of making their protest. And now, although that wasn't an imprisonable offence in the past in this country, the new laws and new legislation make it imprisonable for almost up to a year, which means that protesters are being treated as, you know, non-violent protesters are being treated far more like serious criminal threat to society, if you see what I mean. So you can get a longer jail sentence now for a lot of protest cases than you would for rape. It's
becoming harder and harder to protest, and I suppose the criticism of people like yourself would be, well, actually you push the boundaries too far and that's why they had to be tightened. There was other ways of protesting legally, and people would argue that that's perhaps a method you should have chosen. Why not?
Well, let's be clear, you don't deserve to lose the right to protest because you protest too much. That's a joke. And the moves that this government have made are creating an extremely frightening authoritarian mood in this country, which leads the way for other people in the rest of the world to do similar. What people need to understand, what your viewers need to understand, is that this isn't something that's going to affect future generations and we need to think about the kids and the future. No, it's going to affect us. We're going to breach probably the 1.5 limit that we are committed to in the Paris Climate Accord next year. So that agreement is done. We're not meeting it. And what Antonio Guterres is saying is that we are committing ourselves to hell on earth. And at the same time that he has no power as the most respected diplomat on earth to actually implement anything. All he can do is tell us what the situation is. And this week, you see the unhinged behaviour of Rishi Sunak.
Well, I was just about to ask you about that. How do you feel about these announcements?
It's traumatising to watch because he is pretending that the world isn't real. He's pretending that physics doesn't exist. He's pretending that this won't have consequences. Not only are people all over the whole business community saying, we need to have some continuity here, what are you doing? It's absolutely reckless and dangerous. He's playing politics with an issue of our survival, and it's unacceptable. It's completely outrageous.
Wilfred, as a farmer, I mean, the climate will affect you tremendously.
It is affecting you already.
OK, hold on. The climate is going to affect everybody, so I don't think there's any sensible person out there who's going to disagree with that. But this question is about, should you break the law? And I start off with, what is the most sacred thing in this country, or we as humanity needs? That is that we need to have a rule of law. If you don't agree that there needs to be a rule of law, what you're then actually saying is all right to then have chaos. Now, it may be that you disagree with some of the laws, but the principle is that law... Let me finish my point. Law is really, really important, so most of us could actually feel safe. What we then don't want to do is having the police having to spend all their time trying to implement these laws. Any change means that you're going to have to convince people that this change is important, All the great changes came about where somebody was able to inspire people. Martin Luther King,
suffragettes made some
Mandela,
serious changes.
Gandhi. No, but they brought people with them. They brought people with them.
Well,
And
that is another criticism, is that actually with Extinction Rebellion and other environmental groups, it feels like you're losing. You're losing the vote in the way that you're protesting.
May I say that what happens on shows like this and in the tabloid media that incites violence and hatred against members of our movements, and it is incitement. If you look at what's happened in the tabloid media, they have incited violence blatantly against people like Just Stop Oil, and then people want us to come on shows like this and say, oh, but you're not really taking everyone with you, are you? No, because people get death threats because of the spirit of how this is tackled in the media. The truth is that these people are inspired by Martin Luther King and by Gandhi. And if people care so much about the law, why aren't they also saying, oh, but it's a bit of a problem that our Prime Minister breaks the law, isn't it? It's a bit of a problem that the leader of the nation flagrantly breaks the law, blatantly lies and blatantly goes back on what they've said they'll do. And the moves from Rishi Sunak are moves that he is making against a plan for net zero, which is already criminally negligent. He's already been found to have a criminally negligent plan on climate, and now he's making up stories about 7 bins that don't exist, and he's trying to roll back people's ambition for change. And it is the wrong thing to do. He's not a leader. We need people who can lead. I totally agree with you, Wilfred, but we need people with integrity.
You need people on your side that can lead. You need people on your side that's going to inspire others. At the moment, there's hostility, not inspiration.
But Claire thinks that's coming from the media and how they're portrayed. What do you think?
Gives a different perspective on this. I oftentimes hear this argument about the suffragettes, and you mentioned Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. We fortunately now in 2023 live in a time where not only do we have the law of the land, it is equal for all, which means should you choose to, you are able to vote, which is what the suffragettes fought for. And as a mother to a soon-to-be 6-year-old, it's her birthday next week, I feel it's important that I instill with her some of the core British values. Part of that is respecting the law of the land. Now, if you feel so strongly that our government or any other previous governments or governments to come are not acting on the right behalf of what you want, then you should go out and vote if that's what you want to do, or if that's not what you want to do. When it comes down to this argument that we constantly hear around your right to protest, well, actually, the one beautiful thing about this country is we can all protest. The difference here, and if I can finish my point, is the argument that many people seem to have is not about how much you protest, it's about how you protest. Now, if your point is around ensuring that everyone gets this message about the climate crisis, I can tell you as a mum, it's the one thing that's top of my agenda, and I'm constantly looking at how much I'm recycling and what I can do.
Recycling has nothing to do with climate change.
No, I'm talking about the small fundamental points that all members of...
No, you're not. You're talking about something that's not climate.
All elements
We've got lots
people
of calls
do in their homes, including the kind of vehicles that I drive.
OK, Shay, I just want Claire to have a right of reply on that before I get to our next guest. Claire, sorry.
Well, firstly, recycling has got nothing to do with climate change. Secondly, we're headed for civilisational collapse, and there is nobody to vote for who will deal with this crisis according to the best available information from scientists. There isn't anyone to vote for. We don't have a plan.
It's the way you're going about to voice your message is not a way to galvanise the public.
I don't need you to like me. I need you to understand that you and your child and everyone else that you know and love is in grave danger. We are not dealing with this as a global community, and we need some adults who can lead, who can be in charge of inspiring us to take the right action. And at the moment, we're making things worse and worse and worse. And we are going to live through civilisational collapse, the way we're heading.
Before we get into other calls, I just want to bring in someone else, a person who's known for their eco-protests over the last 3 decades. It's Daniel Hooper, otherwise known as Swampy. Swampy joins us now from a field in West Wales with a suitably dodgy connection there, Daniel. So you've been known to protest quite often. Why do you think it's appropriate to break the law in order to get your message heard?
Well, you know, it's interesting listening to what people have said there. I mean, you know, people were talking about voting, you know, how, and I vote. But how's that getting us? Where is that getting us? We're going backwards instead of forwards. I think everyone can agree that. We're talking about drilling for new oil. We're still trying to do more open cast coal mines. So, voting is getting us nowhere. And also, it's interesting that Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela were mentioned, and they both broke the law to achieve what they needed to. I will say as well that all of the government's commitments to climate change involve giving money, involve corporations getting more money. And I will say that the best way of tackling climate change is to buy less, consume less, fly less. It could save us money. It shouldn't.
Swampy, that's all actually quite interesting and simple messaging there. I suppose the criticism coming from the panel is that the methods that environmental groups take in order to try and get this message across seems to not be the one that's galvanising the nation together behind them.
And Swampy galvanised the nation. Swampy was, he's famous now because back in the day, he managed to get people on side. That is the point that I'm trying to make. People weren't suddenly against it. You need Swampies to try and get your message across.
Swampy, have you ever thought of running for Prime Minister?
Exactly.
or just, politics in general?
Get up another tree.
I don't think I would get very far. I wouldn't have the big business behind me to fund my campaign, would I? And I think that's where it all goes wrong. Instead of calling these people, I'm not a member of Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil, which doesn't mean I won't work with them ever. But the message getting across from the papers is eco-zealots. You'd think these people are going around beating up random people. These people are caring.
But Daniel, you have to admit, Daniel, when you break the law is there to protect. So when you break the law, there is a victim, there is somebody that suffers at the hand of that. Whether that is a company, it has to be owned by someone, so it's financially difficult for them, or whether it's people on the M25 trying to get somewhere, the Dartford crossing, or somebody wanting to watch Wimbledon being disrupted. Those tickets are very expensive. There is, or the people playing. These are athletes that have trained for years and years to get to the position that they're in. So what I'm saying is, I hear that you're breaking the law, but you're acting as if there is no victim involved in it, and there is.
Well, let's be clear. I wouldn't have stopped Wimbledon, but I respect the people that did do it. We could talk about tactics, and I don't necessarily agree with all the tactics of Just Stop Oil, but I think the people doing it are amazing, and they're doing it for exactly the right reasons. And if it gets it into into the papers, and if it gets people talking about it, then all the better. This is an absolute emergency. We shouldn't be talking about whether a sporting event is, we should be talking about how we're going to tackle this emergency. And that's what, people are trying to keep this in headlines. And it's interesting timing, isn't it, that the programme from Chris Packham came out and, whilst the government are reeling back on their promises and just so they could win an election that they had no chance of winning.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see the impact that Chris Packham's documentary has had, in contrast to those announcements by Rishi Sunak. Daniel Hooper there, Swampy, thank you very much for joining us from West Wales, and the connection remained intact that entire time. That was tremendous. OK, we'll go to calls now. Robert from Shropshire, what do you think? Is it ever OK to break the law in order to save the planet? Does the end justify the means?
Robert?
Robert, yes, I hear you. Are you having your lunch?
It's not Robert, it's Alan.
It's Alan. Don't know how we've made that mistake, Alan. I apologise tremendously. What do you think about this topic?
Well, you're talking about Chris Packham saying it's OK to break the law, but you're talking about David Attenborough and Chris Packham, who are being paid to present nature programmes, who are flying around the world. So where's their carbon footprint?
I hear what you're saying, but I suppose flying around the world to make sure you get the story out, the benefit might outweigh the carbon cost to the planet.
No, they don't just do one program on Africa or America or somewhere in Asia. They're all over the place. Australia.
Alan, you're absolutely right.
It's
and
not
they have to
cheap
get there.
fly there.
You're absolutely right. In fact, there's a statistic out that says David Attenborough has seen more of the world than anyone ever will, because part of those places are dying out and don't exist anymore. What do you think about that, Claire, actually, the fact that David Attenborough and conservationists are flying all over the globe? It is a criticism of people. And also King Charles flying MPs up to Ayrshire in order to have a committee meeting on the environment. Is that hypocritical, or is that a necessary evil?
Look, I think the problem here is that people's focus is on individuals' behaviour when we know that it's a systemic crisis. I think that people should fly a lot less, because it is one of the easiest things to not do if you want to stop harming the climate. And most people on Earth will never even dream of getting on a plane. It is an absurdly privileged conversation to even have, should we give up flying? But let's leave that to one side. It's not about like whether or not one person went and flew somewhere to make a nature documentary and maybe that had a carbon footprint. The problem
But do you think in those terms the end justifies the means?
I don't think that's even worth having a conversation about. I think the conversation that people are trying to have here is that, is it worth doing X to save the planet, given that we don't have another one to live on and we're creating one which will be like hell on earth to live on?
We were speaking to Tim Peake earlier. We might just all have to go and live on Mars.
That's the issue. Well, we can't. So what happens when you can't get off a thin slither of livable atmosphere floating in a void of space is that you die on the planet that you're stuck on.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen.
But let's say you're right. You're not going to bring about change by making people feel frightened. That is what's problem with your strategy. It's appropriate
to be frightened, because it is frightening.
But people are not necessarily going to actually have action because you're making them frightened.
OK, I am going to put this on pause, Claire. You'll have your say after the break, but I can tell this is going to be a lively break in the studio. We're going to be speaking to a mother of two who says she is prepared to spend a year behind bars if it means that the world will be a better place for her children. What do you make of that? Is it ever OK to break the law in order to save the planet? 0207 862 2222 is the number. We're going to speak to you right after this. Since 1313, MPs have been forbidden from wearing what item of clothing in Parliament? Is it A, a pinstripe suit? Is it B, a bear suit? Or is it C, a suit of armour? Find out which after the break.
yar waa jecel walaashay oo sida yar jecelahay wii xanuunsatay waxaa ku dhacay shumatag waxaa ku dhacay
Is C. It's a suit of armour. Don't think pinstripe was around actually in 1330, but I would avoid wearing that too. It does make you look like a 1920s gangster. OK, welcome back. Shay and Wilfred are here. Claire is still with us as well, and we're taking more of your calls on this. Is it ever OK to break the law to save the planet? 0207 862 2222 is the number for your views on this, and we'd love to hear from you. So we're now joined by Chloe Naldrett. Lots of people talking on this, a supporter of Just Stop Oil who has been involved in multiple protests. And Chloe, you have actually been arrested. You spent time in prison before, and you think this is necessary in order to benefit your children's future. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Thank you for inviting me into the conversation, Storm. I want to make it really clear. I don't want to go to prison. I didn't want to go to prison. My job is to be at home bringing up my children. But as Chris Packham said in his absolutely excellent documentary on Thursday night, it is the ethically responsible thing to do when my future and the future of my children, of our young people, is under threat. This is what parental responsibility looks like in 2023. I have a huge amount of privilege, and I stepped into that situation fully aware of all of it. But look, I don't have millions of pounds to donate to politicians. Our Conservative government took £3.5 million from fossil fuel lobbyists last year. I'm only an individual. I don't have the means to make glossy ad campaigns like BP and Shell, pretending that they're doing the right thing right now. Then they're not. All I have is my body, my morals, my principles, and I am prepared to put them on the line when our government is taking us in exactly the wrong direction and lying to us about it.
Chloe, can I ask a very nosy question? What was it you went to prison for? What was the law that they say you broke?
I broke a private law, that's a civil injunction, that was taken out on behalf of an oil company to prevent protesters stepping onto its premises. So it wasn't a criminal law, it was a private paid-for law, which I broke with 50 other people at an oil terminal last year.
It's quite a huge statement to make, to say that you would be willing to go to jail for a year in order to benefit your children, because having their mum away from them for a year will be a huge impact to a child or to children.
Yeah, of course. And as I said, it's not something I want to have to do. But the bigger impact to my children is coming from governments and fossil fuel companies that are willfully profiting from the destruction of their future.
See, the thing I can't understand, it didn't achieve anything. If you're trying, what you have to do is galvanise more people to actually see this as being an emergency.
Arguably,
going into jail ain't going to galvanise. I think you're aiming at the politicians. Politicians don't bring about change, it's people. Politicians follow what people do. So what you should be doing is convincing more people to get on side.
Hold on, Wilfred. Nelson Mandela went to jail. So to say that going to jail doesn't necessarily change anything, anyone that's got their way has broken the law.
But if he hadn't galvanised people around him, him going to jail wouldn't have meant nothing.
But there is an argument to say that actually Chloe was targeting exactly the right people. She was going to the oil companies. She was on their premises. I suppose the argument against people going onto the M25 or the Dartford crossing or interrupting Wimbledon is that maybe the targeted victim in that scenario is not...
They'll get a bit of publicity, but it's not necessarily going to get people on side. Change comes when you've got more people actually demanding this change.
Okay, well, how do they get people on side then?
By going out and convincing them, because I really do think there's a lot of people out there that are sort of conscious about something that needs to be done. And how do you draw those people in? I think a lot more effort should be placed on that, because you all seem very intelligent, bright, committed people, but you seem to be aiming at the politicians. And I just think you're going to be wasting your time. You've got to get more people to be supporting the cause.
Chloe, hold on. I just want to go back to Chloe there. I have a right of response there.
Yeah, well, I would say to Wilfred and to the other people and everyone listening who is concerned about this issue, maybe who's watched Chris Packham's documentary, maybe who's watched what's been happening on our streets over the last year. If you're concerned, if you feel that you need to do something about this now, come and join us. Just Stop Oil has meetings several times a week in person and on Zoom. There's an emergency meeting happening this Sunday at 5 o'clock. There'll be details of that on our website. Come along and have a listen. But what I will say, and I think this is absolutely crucially important, you were saying earlier before the break that our laws are there to protect us. Well, we have laws in place to protect us in respect of what we need to be doing in order to meet our obligations, to lower our carbon emissions, and to give ourselves a shot at having a livable future. And our government is breaking those laws. And I will not stand by while they do that. I will not watch places like Greece and Hawaii and Italy and Spain and Australia and Canada. I will not watch them go up in smoke. I will not watch them be flooded. I will not watch crops fail because of drought, or like this week in Spain because of a freak hailstorm in the middle of the summer. I won't stand by and watch that happen. Not on my watch. Not for me. As a person, as a mother, I won't stand by.
Chloe Naldrett.
So I would say to everybody, come and join us, because this movement happens, and the change that we need so badly happens so much faster the more of us there are.
Thank you very much. Actually, Chloe brings up an interesting point there, Claire, the fact that, we've got fires in Greece all over the place, we've got flooding. Do you think that maybe in Britain we're slightly apathetic towards it because we aren't as impacted immediately as other places?
Yeah, I think it's easy for people to ignore when they think that they're going to be able to watch it on their TV screens and that they will be fine.
That it's not their family.
You look at the scale of flooding and the common experience that people are having from, 1/3 of the people in Pakistan have had their lives ruined by immense flooding, like unimaginable scale of flooding. We have flash floods happening all the time in the UK now, because we get these extreme downpours. We've got flooding all over the world. People can see that they're having the same experience in multiple places, and that certain places are getting hit the hardest and the worst, and more people are dying, and they have less resource to recover from it. And the majority of those places are the people who've not caused this crisis. So this crisis is one of inequality, it's one of fossil fuels, it is one of global inequality and localised inequality, which means it's very difficult to tackle without paying attention to how unfair the actual way that this is playing out is. And it's not OK for people of conscience to turn a blind eye to other people's suffering, even if they are in other countries.
Julie from Warwickshire, what do you think about this? I mean, that is quite a compelling argument, that we're just turning a blind eye when we see the flooding on the news, we see the fires raging in Greece, and we tend to be worried about the British holidaymakers.
Good afternoon. I see it from a different angle, a personal angle, and all I can say is 20, 30 years ago, which sometimes I think my facts are perhaps a bit shaky.
That would be 1990.
I went, they were trying to build an airport, the third largest, I think, in the world.
Okay.
In Warwickshire. They were going to, I think, 5 villages were going to just be wiped out from this airport. There was a protest, and it was a big campaign in all different ways. But I went on a walk with hundreds of people.
Protest. Okay.
And the walk was all through these 5 villages that were, churches, farmers, cemeteries, people's livelihood,
Julie, this was in Coventry. I hear you, and that worked. Yeah. But you stayed within the law, Julie. Crucially, did you not? I mean, a walking protest.
I did go on the walk, and I don't think you should break the law to save the planet. At the time, it was a big, big campaign. As I say, this is 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. Lots of meetings, but I walked. I felt passionate about it,
Julie,
and I walked.
I think
those 5 villages.
I think it was 2003, and you were listened to then. But let's say the walk didn't work. Would you have gone a step further in order to make sure that these villages weren't wiped out?
Yes, I think I would have if it didn't work. But the MP, it was Andy King, Labour, and there was a lot of strong opposition. I remember seeing the other side of it would bring jobs, it would bring.
Yep, we hear it all the time as well. We're still hearing it with Heathrow. But would you go a step further? That's crucially. That's all I want to know.
It all depended. If it didn't work, it would all depend on what the next step would be.
Okay, Julie. I can hear your reluctance to say that you would break the law. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for your call. Zoe from Warrington, would you break the law in order to save the planet?
Hi, Storm. Thanks for having me on. I mean, absolutely. I'm, to be honest, I'm really shocked that we're still having this conversation in 2023. I'm of Jewish heritage, and what that underlines for me is that laws change. They change in history, In the 30s, in Nazi Germany, it was legal to annihilate, torture and kill Jews and illegal to keep Jews safe and keep them away from the Nazis.
Yes.
Surely people would agree that that law rightly, of course, changed. That, there are so many laws that have changed over time.
Yes, and I hear what you're saying with that, Zoe. So the question is, though, would you go as far as breaking laws in order to make those kind of... Okay.
Absolutely. Laws are just social constructs. The laws that aren't social constructs are the laws of nature, the laws of physics. Our current politicians are going to tell us that gravity doesn't exist next. They're just lying to us. They're lying to us. The planet will carry on, but we won't, and our society will collapse and our economy will collapse. So, Claire's right. People need to listen to her. It might be scary, but it's true.
Zoe, thank you very much. I should also say, in this whole conversation, we are in no way condoning breaking the law. We are posing the question to see how people feel when they look at the law versus their own morality and how that equates for them. Lee from Bedfordshire, what's your thoughts on this when it comes to the law versus morality? In your view, your own, what weighs out?
Hi, Storm and the panel. I totally disagree with Claire. We shouldn't be breaking the law. We shouldn't be damaging property. There was actually a lake which they destroyed all the fish in that lake. As for...
Do you know the name of the lake? Because I'm blanking on this story.
No, I'm not too sure, but it was in the news.
Have you heard this accusation before, Claire? No.
This red dye was thrown in the water and it's killed all the fish.
Okay, well, I think environmental groups generally try and avoid death. But okay, I can't disagree with you because I've never heard about that before, Lee. But when you think about it, all the great changes in the past have happened because someone was willing to step out beyond the law, break the law, in order to get the change that they thought was needed for society.
But it wasn't then breaking the law that brought about the change. What brought about the change...
Well, nobody liked the suffragettes. Suffragettes were vilified and hated in their time.
But what eventually happened, there was enough people that politicians said, well, actually, there's enough that we need to bring about this change. Even Nelson Mandela, even the civil rights movements, there's enough of a groundswell to say the time has now come that we need to change the law.
An overwhelming majority of British people want the climate crisis to be addressed with serious and rapid and deep action, and the government are doing the opposite. So what you're saying is correct. There should be a groundswell of support, and there is. Everyone in this country pretty much agrees with us that they don't want more runways, they don't want more roads.
Hold on, Claire. The polls absolutely show that you are right. Yeah. The majority of the British population do think this is a serious problem. The problem is when you then put another poll to say, are you willing to pay for those changes? That's when the support dwindles. And maybe it's because of the cost of living crisis. But how do you get over that hurdle?
Need to be done to tackle the climate crisis will make people healthier, will make people have lower bills, will make us more energy secure.
But it may cost ahead of time.
It will not cost more to do what we need to do now than it will cost in the long term to continually clean up mess from the devastation, to continually watch our properties on the coastline drop into the sea because of coastal erosion and a rising sea level, and then to watch our civilization and eventually our food systems, our medical systems, things will collapse. More wars. People are thinking in the military about how to go to war to secure more resources so that we can guarantee that we can fight the wars that are going to come, because the projection is the very destabilisation of an organised global community. That is a polite way of saying that everything that's organised on planet Earth is going to fall apart and break down, and we are going to live through that. Like, it's not... I just can't understand why this is such a difficult conversation for people to wrap their head around. We have to look at reality and act accordingly. And we can't look away. And you're so right. It's easy to look away for people in this country, in their privilege, with their TV on, turn off the news when it's bad news. I don't want to think about it. But it is here. It's coming. It's hurting people. It's killing people all over the world.
And I think that's a perfect place to draw this debate to a close. Clare Farrell, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for all your calls as well on that debate. We're going to have to move on after the break. Would you go on strike over housework? 0207 862 2222 is the number you need. We'll take your calls on this in just a moment.